The roar of the crowd, the clash of helmets, the American dream playing out on 100 yards of grass. From 1950 to 1990, professional football transformed from a rough-and-tumble pastime into America's most beloved sport. But behind the glory and the championships, behind the heroic catches and bone-crushing tackles, there were men who paid the ultimate price. Some died young, their careers cut short by tragedy. Others lived full lives but left us too soon. This is their story. When we think about the golden age of football, we often picture leather helmets giving way to plastic, black and white television broadcasts becoming color spectacles, and stadiums filling with tens of thousands of fans. We remember the legends who defined the game, but we rarely pause to remember those who died during these 4 decades. Men whose names deserve to be spoken again, whose contributions to the sport shaped everything that came after. The 1950s began with football still finding its identity. The game was brutal, far more so than today. Players wore minimal padding, and the medical understanding of head injuries was virtually non-existent. The men who play year-round. Chuck Hughes died on October 24, 1971, and his death would become one of the most shocking moments in NFL history. Hughes was a wide receiver for the Detroit Lions, a journeyman player who had bounced between teams, always fighting to prove himself worthy of a roster spot. During a game against the Chicago Bears at Tiger Stadium, Hughes collapsed on the field. He was only 28 years old. Players and officials rushed to his side as 60,000 fans watched in stunned silence. Hughes was carried off the field on a stretcher, and despite desperate attempts to save him, he was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. The cause was a heart attack brought on by severe arteriosclerosis that no one knew he had. Hughes remains the only NFL player to die on the field during a game. His death sent shockwaves through the league and forced teams to begin thinking more seriously about cardiac screening and emergency medical protocols. The 1950 more gladiatorial, Stone Johnson, a running back who showed promise with the Kansas City Chiefs, died in 1963 during a preseason game when he suffered a spinal cord injury. He was only 23 years old. The injury occurred during what seemed like a routine play, but the impact fractured his vertebrae. Johnson died 9 days later, never regaining consciousness. His death was a stark reminder that every play, every tackle, carried the risk of catastrophe. But not all deaths during these decades happened on the field. Many occurred years after players hung up their cleats, the result of injuries sustained during their playing days, the cumulative toll of hundreds or thousands of hits, or simply the wear and tear on bodies pushed beyond normal limits. Ernie Stautner played defensive tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers from 1950 to 1963. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1969, one of the few defensive players of his era to receive that honor. Stautner was known for his relentless playing style, his ability to shed blockers, and his leadership on the field. He died in 2006, long after our focus period, but many of his contemporaries from the 1950s didn't live to see the new millennium. Players from that generation often suffered from arthritis, chronic pain, and disabilities related to their football careers. The sport gave them fame and purpose, but it also took a physical toll that lasted decades. Jimmy Big Daddy Lipscomb was a massive defensive tackle who played for the Los Angeles Rams, Baltimore Colts, and Pittsburgh Steelers during the 1950s and early 1960s. Standing 6 feet 6 inches tall and weighing nearly 300 pounds, Lipscomb was an intimidating presence on the field. He was also beloved by teammates for his generous spirit and sense of humor. His life had been marked by hardship from the beginning. His mother was murdered when he was 11 years old, and he spent his teenage years moving between relatives. Football became his salvation, giving him structure and purpose. But on May 10, 1963, at age 31, Lipscomb was found dead in Baltimore. The official cause was listed as a heroin overdose, though the circumstances surrounding his death remained controversial for years. Some friends insisted he never used drugs and suspected foul play, whether accident, suicide, or something more sinister. Lipscomb's death robbed football of one of its most dynamic personalities. The 1960s brought expansion and increased popularity to professional football. The American Football League challenged the established NFL, creating competition that benefited players through higher salaries and more opportunities. The first Super Bowl was played in 1967, cementing football's place in American culture. Television contracts grew larger, stadiums expanded, and the sport became big business. But the game itself remained dangerous. Brian Piccolo's story became one of the most famous in football history, though not for reasons he would have chosen. Piccolo played running back for the Chicago Bears in the late 1960s, often serving as a backup to Hall of Famer Gale Sayers. The two men, one white and one black, became close friends during an era when such friendships across racial lines were still noteworthy. especially in professional sports. Their relationship would inspire the television movie Brian's Song, which brought their story to millions of viewers. In 1969, Piccolo began experiencing breathing difficulties during training camp. Medical tests revealed he had embryonal cell carcinoma, a rare and aggressive form of cancer. He underwent surgery and treatment but continued to deteriorate. Piccolo died on June 16, 1970, at age 20. His death devastated the Bears organization and shocked the sports world. Gale Sayers dedicated his record-breaking 1969 season to his friend, and the Bears established an award in Piccolo's name that's still given annually to the team's most courageous player. Piccolo's death also raised awareness about cancer and inspired fundraising efforts that continue today. The war in Vietnam cast a shadow over the 1960s and early 1970s, and several football players served in the military during this period. Some never returned. Bob Kalsu was an offensive lineman for the Buffalo Bills who left football to serve in the Army. He was killed in action in Vietnam on July 25, 1970, becoming the only active NFL player to die in the war. Kalsu had just completed his rookie season and was expected to compete for a starting position. Despite their fame, were not immune to the same sacrifices required of other young men during wartime. The 1970s saw professional football reach new heights of popularity. Monday Night Football debuted in 1970, bringing the sport into prime time and making stars of players who might have remained relatively anonymous. The Pittsburgh Steelers dynasty, the Dallas Cowboys' dominance, the Oakland Raiders' rebellious image, all of these storylines captured public imagination. Super Bowl Sunday became an unofficial national holiday, but beneath the glamour and growing revenues, the game remained brutal. Darryl Stingley was a wide receiver for the New England Patriots, whose career ended in 1978. In one of the most infamous plays in NFL history, during a preseason game against the Oakland Raiders, Stingley was hit by safety Jack Tatum in a collision that left him paralyzed from the chest down. Stingley survived the hit but never walked again. Though Stingley lived until 2007, his playing career ended at age 26, and his quality of life was forever altered by a single moment on the field. The hit was legal by the rules of the time, but it raised questions about player safety that the league is still grappling with today. Jeff Fuller was a defensive back who played briefly for the San Francisco 49ers in the mid-1980s. His story represents the darker side of football's competitive culture. Fuller developed a dependency on painkillers prescribed to help him play through injury. After his brief NFL career ended, he struggled with addiction and legal troubles. Fuller died in 2003, but his descent began during his playing days, when injury management often meant masking pain rather than properly treating it. His story was not unique. Many players from this era became dependent on pain medication, a problem that prefigured the opioid crisis that would devastate communities across America decades later. John Matuszak, known as the Twos, was a defensive end who played for several teams during the 1970s and early 1980s, winning 2 Super Bowls with the Oakland Raiders. Matuszak was the #1 overall pick in the 1973 draft, and his talent was undeniable, but he struggled with substance abuse throughout his career and beyond. Standing 6 feet 8 inches tall, with a wild personality, Matuszak became a Hollywood actor after retirement, appearing in films and television shows. But on June 17, 1989, at age 38, Matuszak died of heart failure brought on by years of drug and alcohol abuse. Toxicology reports showed he had multiple drugs in his system at the time of death. Matuszak's story illustrated how some players use substances to cope with the pressures of professional football, the physical pain, the expectations, and the difficulty of transitioning to life after the game ended. Lyle Alzado was one of the most feared defensive linemen of his era, playing from 1971 to 1985 for the Denver Broncos, Cleveland Browns, and Los Angeles Raiders. Alzado was known for his intensity and aggression on the field, qualities that made him successful but also hinted at inner turmoil. After retiring, Alzado publicly admitted to using anabolic steroids throughout most of his career. In 1991, he was diagnosed with brain lymphoma, a rare and aggressive cancer. Alzado believed his steroid use caused the cancer, though medical experts debated whether there was a direct link. He died on May 14, 1992, at age 43. Before his death, Alzado spoke openly about his regrets, trying to warn younger players about the dangers of performance-enhancing drugs. His admission was groundbreaking at a time when steroid use in sports was rarely discussed publicly. The stories of players who died during the 1950s through 1990s reveal patterns. Many deaths resulted from heart conditions, sometimes undiagnosed, sometimes exacerbated by the physical demands of the sport. Others died in accidents, car crashes, plane crashes, or other tragedies unrelated to football itself. Some died from violence or under suspicious circumstances. And increasingly, as medical research advanced, people began to understand that the repeated head trauma experienced by football players had long-term consequences. Wally Hilgenberg was a linebacker who played 16 seasons in the NFL, primarily for the Minnesota Vikings. He was part of the famous Purple People Eaters defense that dominated the league in the 1970s. Hilgenberg appeared in 4 Super Bowls with the Vikings, though they lost all 4. After retirement, he seemed to be adjusting well to civilian life. But in the late 1980s, he began experiencing neurological symptoms. He was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, commonly known as ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. The disease progressively destroyed his motor neurons, leaving him unable to walk or care for himself. Hilgenberg died in 2008, but his decline began in the late 1980s, during the tail end of our focus period. In later years, researchers would investigate whether the repeated head trauma experienced by football players might increase the risk of ALS and national obsession. They played through pain, often without adequate medical care. They performed for fans who loved them, but didn't always understand the sacrifices being made. They earned far less money than modern players, and they had no union to protect their interest for much of this period. These men came from all backgrounds. Some grew up poor and saw football as their only path to a better life. Others came from middle-class families and played for the love of the game. They were black and white in an era when integration was still recent and tensions often ran high. They were from small towns and big cities, from every region of the country. What united them was their willingness to play a violent, demanding sport at the highest level. Consider the offensive linemen, men whose names casual fans rarely knew. They played in relative anonymity, protecting quarterbacks and opening holes for running backs. They absorbed. Many offensive linemen from this era died prematurely, their bodies worn out from years of carrying 300 pounds or more, from joints destroyed by the stress of blocking techniques, from hearts strained by the demands of maintaining that size. Or think about the defensive backs, smaller players who had to tackle men 50 or 60 pounds heavier while running at full speed. They suffered concussions routinely, often returning to the same game after being knocked unconscious. The phrase "getting your bell rung" was common in locker rooms, a casual description of what we now understand to be traumatic brain injury. These players were celebrated for their toughness, for their willingness to sacrifice their bodies for the team. No one talked about the long-term consequences. Running backs took perhaps the most punishment of any position. They carried the ball 20 or 30 times per game, absorbing hits from every angle. The great running backs of this era, men whose names are still revered, paid a heavy price for their excellence. Even those who survived into old age often dealt with chronic pain, difficulty walking, and cognitive issues. The running backs who died young often had stories marked by tragedy beyond football, lives complicated by the fame that came too early, or the loss of identity when their careers ended. Quarterbacks, the glamour position, had their own challenges. They were the most visible players, the ones who received credit for victories and blame for defeats. The pressure was immense, and not everyone handled it well. Some turned to alcohol or drugs. Some struggled with depression. A few took their own lives years after retirement, unable to cope with the loss of purpose that came when the crowds stopped cheering. Special teams players, the men who covered kicks and punts, often faced the most violent collisions on the field. These plays involved full-speed impacts between players who had 20 or 30 yards to build up momentum. Broken bones, torn ligaments, and concussions were common. Some special teams players from this era developed chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, the degenerative brain disease that has become central to discussions about football's future. The coaches and team doctors during these decades did the best they could with the knowledge available at the time, but that knowledge was limited. Concussions were not taken seriously. Players were encouraged to play through pain. Painkillers and anti-inflammatory medications were handed out freely. The culture celebrated toughness above all else. Admitting injury was seen as weakness. Players who couldn't tough it out were cut from teams and replaced by younger men eager for their chance. Off the field, players faced challenges that the public rarely saw. Many struggled with the transition to retirement. Football had been the center of their lives since childhood. Their identities were built around being athletes. When that ended, often suddenly and without warning, many felt lost. Some drank, Some made poor business decisions, losing the money they'd earned. Some couldn't adjust to the slower pace of normal life after years of adrenaline and competition. The suicide rate among former NFL players is higher than the general population, a fact that wasn't widely known during the period we're discussing, but has become clear in retrospect. Family members paid a price too. Wives dealt with husbands who were in constant pain, who had mood swings, who struggled with anger or depression. Children grew up with fathers who were often absent, who couldn't play catch in the backyard because their bodies were too broken, who died young, leaving families without providers or support. The glory of game day rarely made up for these hardships. The African American players who competed during this era faced additional challenges. Although professional football had been integrated since the late 1940s, racism remained widespread. Black players were often paid less than white players of comparable ability. They faced discrimination in housing when teams traveled to certain cities. They were stereotyped into certain positions and excluded from others. Playing quarterback or middle linebacker, positions considered leadership roles, was difficult for black players until the 1970s. They dealt with racist taunts from fans and sometimes from opposing players. They had fewer opportunities for endorsements in post-career employment in coaching or broadcasting. Despite these obstacles, many of the greatest players from 1950 to 1990 were African American. They excelled through talent and determination, overlooked in favor of discussing only their athletic achievements. The period from 1950 to 1990 also saw significant changes in how the game was played. In the 1950s, most offenses ran the ball far more than they threw it. Defenses could be much more physical with receivers, leading to brutal collisions. Face masks were not mandatory until 1962, and even then, the early face masks provided minimal protection. Players in the 1950s routinely suffered broken noses, fractured jaws, and missing teeth. By the 1960s, passing became more common, and with it came rule changes designed to protect defensive players. But defenses adapted, becoming faster and more violent. The 1970s brought even more emphasis on passing, and quarterbacks became more valuable. This led to new rules protecting passers, but running backs and receivers still absorbed tremendous punishment. The 1980s saw the beginning of collisions became more violent. A tackle that might have been painful but survivable in 1960 could be career-ending or worse. The human body's ability to absorb impact hadn't evolved, but the force of those impacts had increased dramatically. Equipment improved over these decades, but not always in ways that enhanced safety. Better helmets allowed players to use their heads as weapons, leading to more spinal injuries and concussions. Lighter pads meant players could move faster, but provided less protection. The artificial turf introduced in many stadiums in the 1960s and 1970s was harder than grass, leading to more injuries and more stress on joints. Medical care improved significantly from 1950 to 1990. In the early years, team doctors were often local physicians with little specialized training in sports medicine. By the 1980s, teams employed full medical staffs with trainers, physicians, and rehabilitation specialists. But even with better care, the fundamental problem remained. Football was a collision sport, and collisions caused damage. Better treatment could speed recovery, but it couldn't prevent injury in the first place. The Players' Union, formed in the 1950s but not truly powerful until the 1980s, fought for better safety standards, improved medical care, and disability benefits for injured players. These battles were hard-fought and often acrimonious. Team owners resisted changes that would cost money or acknowledged that the sport was inherently dangerous. Players were caught between wanting to protect themselves and not wanting to be seen as soft or unwilling to play. The deaths of players during this period, whether from football-related causes or other reasons, forced uncomfortable conversations. Each tragedy prompted brief periods of reflection, calls for reform, and then, inevitably, a return to business as usual. The sport was too popular, too profitable, and too embedded in American culture to change fundamentally based on individual tragedies, no matter how heartbreaking. Looking back from our present vantage point, we can see patterns that weren't obvious at the time. The players who died young often had warning signs that were ignored. The culture of toughness prevented them from seeking help. The limited medical knowledge of the era meant conditions went undiagnosed. The financial pressures meant players competed even when they shouldn't have. The lack of long-term planning meant many retired players struggled to build new lives. The legacies of players who died during the 1950 to 1990 period extend beyond their statistics and accomplishments. They forced the sport to confront its dangers. They inspired medical research into brain injuries and other football-related conditions. They prompted rule changes designed to protect players. They showed that glory and tragedy often exist side by side in professional sport. Today's players benefit from the lessons learned during these 4 decades. They have better equipment, better medical care, and better understanding of the risks they face. They earn more money and have more support after their careers end. None of this would have happened without the men who came before, including those who paid the ultimate price. As we remember these players, we should honor their humanity, not just their athletic achievements. They were sons and brothers, husbands and fathers. They had dreams beyond football, even if those dreams sometimes went unrealized. They laughed and struggled, succeeded and failed, lived and died. Their stories deserve to be told, not to glorify death or violence, but to recognize the full measure of what was given and what was lost in the pursuit of excellence on the football field. The game continues. Every Sunday, new heroes emerge, and new stories are written. The crowds still roar, the helmets still clash, the American dream still plays out on 100 yards of grass. But we remember the men who came before, the ones who didn't make it to see how their sport evolved, the ones whose contributions helped build something larger than themselves. We remember their names, their faces, their moments of triumph, and we remember that behind every legend, behind every highlight, there were real people who gave everything they had to play the game they loved. This is their story, and it deserves to be told.